Hey everyone, Metagross Freak here, and today we're looking at Warrior Class, Transformers, Robots in Disguise, Windblade from the Combiner Force line. Now, if during this video I accidentally say Wingblade, apologies. To be honest, I've been saying Windblade and Wingblade a lot when talking about this character with some of my friends, because I really love this character. She is one of the only two fembots we have in Robots in Disguise, or at least one of the only two main characters, which is actually a big improvement over most series that basically just have one fembot, and 9 times out of 10 it's RC. But we actually have a character that's a main character, and she was very prominent in Seasons 1 and 2, as well as has a couple different shoutouts in Season 3. So this is actually the repaint of a figure from the Combiner Force line. Combiner Force has a slightly darker shade of red, and some of those decals are a little bit different as well. Like you can see that there's supposed to be blue, like a blue in the middle of her chest, and there's black on the sides, and that she has blue on her knees, and that isn't present on this figure. Instead we have red on the middle, yellow on the sides, then yellow knees. So this is a slight repaint. Also, in addition, is her full face is not exposed like on the first reprint. First print, as you can see here, she has her battle mask up. And I actually kind of like this. I didn't get a chance to get the original figure, but when I saw this, I was like, I want this. The other real main difference is her yellow fan that attaches to the back of her head, and this figure red. On the back of the box, it shows that same fan. The same fan over here shows that fan in kind of a light aqua blue, but it doesn't come in that color. And it's not that this was put in the package wrong, it's that burgundy color on both sides. But this is a really cool figure, and I'm really looking forward to showing this one off to you, because I've been waiting to get her for a while. Out of the packaging, Windblade is actually really impressive. The one downside to her robot mode is she does have a fair bit of a backpack. Unfortunately, the tail and nose cone of her vehicle mode basically make up this fairly large backpack. The wings, I think, are excusable just because that's how Windblade works. The wings can fold up flat against her shoulders, but they kind of prefer to be tilted back a little bit, like so. But yeah, you can fold them flat. They don't lock in place. The two accessories she does come with are, like I said before, her little Tenso War fan, which actually has a fairly decent amount of molding to it. But I was actually incorrect. It is painted that blue color from the front. It's just that it's packaged in a way that you can't see the blue from the window box. Instead, you can only see this red. The War fan does plug into a little bit of a hole behind her head, so you can easily, if you move her head forward, you can easily plug it in like so, giving her a far more impressive bit of a headgear, I guess you could say. It feels like her face is supposed to have some kind of I guess like the face guard is supposed to flip up, but I can't seem to figure out how that's supposed to work. I removed the fan because it feels like the face mask is supposed to flip up. It does. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but if I hold it like this, it does have a little bit of amount of give to it, and I can feel that the actual face plate kind of lifts off and that it's separate from the eyes. Let me see if I can get it where you can see it. Because it's not. The face plate is a separate piece, but it seems like the face stays on, so it could just be that they screwed it on loosely on mine, because there's a screw on the back of the head, so it could just be it's a little loose on mine. That's kind of unusual. Articulation is pretty great. There is a ball joint on the head, ball joint on both shoulders, and they are pretty decent ball joints as well. Swivel in the upper arm. Sorry, with a swivel in the upper arm, though it's a very tight swivel, as well as hinge in the elbow. No wrist articulation, unfortunately, but considering the articulation you do get and the fact that she is a fairly narrow robot mode, that's acceptable. For the legs, we have a ball joint in the thigh, and she can almost do the splits. Kind of. If you put the legs out to the side, you can kind of do the splits as well. Though you do get enough articulation that she is able to sit down, like in a chair, kind of sit down. You also have a swivel in the upper thigh, which is pretty standard nowadays, and a hinge in the knee, but unfortunately no foot articulation other than what's necessary for transformation. Last interesting bit of articulation is on the wings, these two little discs that have the fan blades. Both the blade inside is capable of turning, but you kind of have to have either small fingers or something that will be able to easily turn it. But the little blades do turn, but the discs, the wings that the blades are on, also rotate, and that's because her vehicle mode is a VTOL, which is a acronym meaning vertical takeoff and landing. So what does that exactly mean? Well, it means that basically her vehicle mode, her jet mode, is able to take off and land regardless of whether it is staying still on land or if it's moving, like to take off like a normal plane would. As for waist articulation, there is a swivel in the waist, but that seems to be fairly standard with robots in disguise figures. I mentioned before that the wings can fold flat. I actually found out that if you try to fold them flat, you can actually untab them from the, it's hard to see, I know, you can untab them from the hinge they're on, and the wings pop off. So I would actually recommend not trying to fold them flat and keep them at the kind of, I'd say maybe this is maybe like 120-degree angle that they're at, just so you don't accidentally knock off a wing during play. The other big accessory she comes with is this massive piece of plastic here. Surprisingly, Windblade does not come with the two small swords that are seen both in the show and on her packaging. She has these transparent swords. She unfortunately only comes with one sword. However, there are tabs on it, so you can put it on either side of her waist, as you can see. So if you have two different versions of Windblade, you could theoretically put two swords. This is actually not the whole sword. This is just the sheath for the sword. And by simply pulling it out, here you have Windblade's sword. The original version of Windblade was molded in that transparent plastic. However, this repaint, and I guess technically because of the head, slight remold, is just solid black. And so I think that's the reason why the face feels like it could pop off, is rather than remold a brand new head, they molded the head without the face and just had it that basically the only difference in the head was that they swapped out the face to minimize having to remold it as much as possible. From what I can tell, the whole torso section, which by the way there's some pretty nice molding on like the wings and the torso, seems to pretty much just be a repaint. So in order to justify it being a new figure but still be different, other than just a repaint, I think they just remolded that little bit of a face bit. That way they didn't have to remold the whole head. And I can kind of appreciate that. But there's actually a good amount of molding on the sword. You can see there's a good amount of texture on the hilt, and it even has its own little fan blade. But it fits comfortably in one of her hands. And unlike the Soundwave hands, which are kind of claw-like, this doesn't feel like I'm going to like break the fingers as I put the sword in. It's a very nice sword, a very good length sword. It feels like there's some weight behind it, and I would love to see good poses with her. The fan blade fits in her hand, albeit not very well. Like, she can hold the fan blade, but it's not like you're not gonna get it because you're not gonna buy this because you want to see her holding fan blades. You're gonna, I don't know. I feel for the most part, I'm probably just gonna keep the fan blade in the back of her head to be more accurate to her show appearance and her comic appearance. For those of you who weren't aware, Windblade is actually a character created by the fandom. It was a very popular character. It was basically the popular character that won Hasbro's like Create Your Own Transformer campaign. Which there's only, I think, 2 or 3 characters that have actually gone through and been made by fans. The other of which being a combiner, the Pyra Magna combiner, Victorion, is an awesome combiner. I really want to be able to get that someday. But anyway, here we go. You can actually, with the sword sheathed, you actually can put the sheathed sword in the hand. At least I think you can. Yeah, you can. You can hold the sheathed sword in one hand. So I guess if you really want to, you can BS that this is either a rifle or the other sword if you really, really want to. But I don't know. It looks a little silly compared to the other sword. But for the most part, like I said before, it can clip onto either hip. Little. Finally. Okay, so despite the fact that on the legs there are 2 little notches, you can see there's one up here on the top hip and one on the bottom hip, it actually does not plug in on either side to the bottom hip. You have to put it up on the top hip by the waist. But because of waist articulation, just like Drift, she is able to get into a pose where she's able to grab the hilt of her sword. So you can get some really cool like sword unsheathing poses. I really love this figure. She's a little skinny, but that's perfectly acceptable given the fact that she turns into a plane. I'd rather have a skinnier figure turn into a plane than just like this big clunky figure. I'm looking at pretty much every version of Jetfire. So for comparison, here she is next to her, basically her fellow fembot, warrior class, strong arm. As you can see, they're basically about the same height, though strong arm is a lot bulkier because of her vehicle mode. And here she is next to warrior class Grimlock in his robot mode. And again, she's about the same height, though not nearly as bulky. Though, ironically, her backpack is a bit larger, just because it contains both the wing and the nose cone instead of just a dino head. So anyway, I'm going to get her into vehicle mode, BRB. One little cool note that I forgot to mention was that even though she can't hold the sword with both hands because of the upper arm articulation, she is able to swivel her other arm close enough to hover over the other sword, the other sword hand, so she can hold the sword with one hand, but pose as if she was holding it with both hands. And I think that's really cool because that's something that Drift really can't do. Though I still stand by the fact that this giant sword sheath looks ridiculous. I kind of wish they had a better way of storing this. Not a big fan. Here we have Windblade's VTOL, also known as a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. One of the main downsides is that, as you can see, her arms are just kind of dangling off the sides. And if you flip the robot up, you can see exactly how she transforms. Basically, her feet touch her butt, and she just has a piece of armor go over her head. Kind of a lazy vehicle mode, but you know what? If you're not looking at the stomach of the plane, this is phenomenal. From the top, like if you just have this sitting on a shelf, this looks really good. This is better than a lot of the plane modes that a lot of older Transformers figures have. One really weird thing is technically you're supposed to have the wings down like this, but they don't like staying down. I feel like they're going to pop off. They're more comfortable being tilted up a little bit, a couple degrees, especially this right wing. That was the one I had that popped off earlier. Though as you can see, that gives kind of a weird wing shape. I'm not a big fan of that, but I guess that's kind of what I have to deal with. Either just have the wings risk popping off or have them be at a really weird angle. Here we have the giant sword sheath, which if that doesn't, it does store, but it stores kind of weird. It does have a bit of a landing skid right here at the front, I guess to help justify having a giant plane with a sword. That plugs basically right between the knees. There's a little piece right there that it plugs into. And it doesn't really rest flat. It sits uncomfortably over her bust, which, by the way, as you can see here, the robo boobs just kind of stick out from the plane. So I'm not trying to get I'm not trying to get crass here, but if you want a plane with boobs, get Windblade. I really think I don't know. It's weird. It rests like just right up against it, and that prevents it from folding flat against the vehicle mode. It also makes it very unstable. Like it doesn't balance when you have the sword stored, which is unfortunate. That's one of the other two downsides. I'd say the main downsides being the arms just dangling off the side, and the fact that when you're storing her sword, it doesn't balance. Regardless of how you store the sword, however, right in the nose cone there is flip-out landing gear, which, if the landing gear is out, looks really good. But again, actually the landing gear allows it to balance fairly well. In fact, even with the landing gear in, it's balanced. With the landing gear out, it helps just give it another contact point and helps raise the nose cone up to make it look a little less like there's just a plane sitting on the ground, a little bit more like it's landed. As before, the disc pieces where the engines are rotatable. You can have them pointing down to push her upwards, facing forward for regular flight. I personally like having them either flat facing down, just to be kind of like a mini hovercraft, or facing forward for just high-speed flight. Though I definitely would say the sword sheath attaching to the vehicle mode is probably the weakest part about the vehicle. The backside does look a little bulky compared to other planes, just because you have basically her shins connecting to the tail. But I think it's actually a really solid plane mode. I really like this, and the blue that's used for both her fan as well as her eyes and the cockpit here is just great. Great vehicle mode. Oh, and what's really funny is the head is hidden by this little black panel, and if you lift it up, peekaboo, there she is. So if you flip that up, you can basically see all she's really doing is folding her feet up into her butt, and she's wearing a hat, a little plane-shaped hat. So kind of a funny vehicle mode, but I would say this is just a really strong vehicle mode. Yeah, the only things wrong with the vehicle mode are the arms dangling off the side, and the fact that this weapon storage system is dumb. I'd say the only real downsides of the robot mode are the fact that the nose cone doesn't really store very well. It doesn't store flat, and just the fact that, again, you have this giant sword sheath. I would almost say not to include this. I kind of wish it was just the sword, or maybe two swords that could, maybe just store on the underbelly. Like if this could, I don't know, if you were able to tab this in, like tab it in to the side of the arms or something, that'd be great. So I'd say weapon storage is not a strong point of this figure, though. For comparison, I know I've been kind of babbling about weapon storage and the tail and the arms and stuff, but for comparison, here she is next to Alpine Drift. As you can see, they're roughly the same size. Alpine Drift is a little bit shorter and wider, but also he doesn't fold up as compactly, and also he turns into a car and not a jet that can take off without having to speed up. And just for fun, here she is next to the Last Night the Last Night Voyager class Grimlock. Yeah, so just good comparison. I really like this figure. I would say, hands down, she is totally worth getting. If you can find the original color scheme for her, the one that isn't repainted, I'd recommend getting that one over this one. But I'd say, regardless of what color scheme you get, Windblade is a phenomenal figure and is definitely worth adding to your collection if you're a fan of her character. I love this figure. Don't really like the weapon storage. Honestly, this is the weakest part about her. Great figure. Get one for yourself. I've been Metagross Freak, and thank you all for watching. See you around. Or either like Moses or... Damn it, Shadow.